Hi, welcome to Campfire Myths. Tonight, we'll begin our journey into quiet legends told under the stars. Stories passed from voice to voice, from one fire to another, soft as smoke in the wind. Let the fire crackle gently in the background and allow yourself to sink deeper into stillness. You're safe here. And this is the story of the Whispering Oak. There is a place deep in the Appalachian Hills where no road dares to carve its way, and no map holds a name. There, in the shadow of ancient pine and soft beds of moss, stands an oak tree unlike any other. Locals, what few remain, call it the Whispering Oak. They say it's been standing since long before men set foot on these lands. Older than any barn, any house, older even than memory. Its trunk is wide and gnarled, branches stretching like arms in a hush. No birds nest in it, no squirrels dart through its limbs. But when the wind moves through the forest, the oak speaks. At least that's how the old stories go. Long ago, there was a boy named Eli. Quiet. The kind of child who spent more time listening than speaking. He had a habit of sitting alone near the woods behind his grandfather's cabin, sketching trees, imagining lives for them, naming them like pets. His grandfather, Amos, was a man of few words but deep eyes. Every night he'd sit out on the porch with Eli and tell him tales from his youth, some funny, some sad, and some that made the firelight flicker in strange ways. One night the stars were brighter than usual. The sky had that kind of hush before snowfall, even though it was summer. Amos cleared his throat and said, "You ever hear the tree talk?" Eli looked up. "The tree?" Amos nodded toward the woods. "The one with the bark, like riverstone, the whispering oak." Eli shook his head, unsure whether this was another one of those grown-up jokes meant to tease children. "They say if you sit by it long enough," Amos continued, "you'll hear voices, not loud, not clear, but soft, like dreams trying to be remembered." Eli didn't ask more. He didn't need to. That night, while the cabin slept, he slipped on his boots and followed the moonlight. The forest was not frightening, not to Eli. The sounds of insects and rustling leaves felt like company. The deeper he walked, the quieter it got. Not silent, but soft, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. And then he saw it, the whispering oak. It stood in a clearing where no clearing should be, the moon painting silver over its bark. It was massive, wider than three men holding hands around it. Its roots spilled out of the ground like old bones, and even though there was no wind, its branches trembled. Eli sat. He said nothing, just listened. For a long time there was only his breathing and the faint creak of the tree. Then, just as he was about to close his eyes, he heard it. A murmur. Not from behind him, not from the woods, from the tree. It was like trying to remember a song you'd once heard in a dream. The voice didn't speak in words exactly. It hummed thoughts, echoes, feelings. And in that moment, Eli understood that the oak remembered things. Not just seasons and weather, but people. Their thoughts, their worries, their quiet regrets whispered at its roots. Generations had sat where he was sitting. Some to find peace, some to say goodbye, some just to be heard. And the oak had listened. Eli felt a strange warmth settle over him. Not physical, but inside. He leaned back against the bark, and the hum continued. Soft, patient, almost like a lullaby. When Eli returned the next morning, his boots were damp with dew and his eyes full of calm. He didn't tell his grandfather what he'd heard. He didn't need to. Amos just looked at him, smiled slightly, and poured him a cup of warm milk. Years passed. Eli grew older, but he returned to the oak often, through school years, through heartbreaks, through nights he couldn't sleep. And each time the tree welcomed him with silence that spoke more than words ever could. He never carved into it, never took its leaves. He just sat, and the oak whispered. Sometimes he would bring others, friends who were hurting, who had lost someone, who didn't know what to do next. He didn't explain the tree, just led them there, let them sit. And always, when they returned, they carried with them a quiet peace, like the forest had breathed something into them. Eli became a teacher, then a storyteller. He travelled far, told tales to children in libraries, to elders in quiet homes, to strangers in little towns across the country. But no matter where he went, he always kept a small wooden pendant around his neck, a knot from a fallen branch, shaped like a spiral. He never said where it came from. Some said he just liked the way it felt. Others thought it was a talisman. But only Eli knew. It was the weight of memory, of being heard by something ancient and kind. On his last visit, Eli was old. His beard was white and his walk was slow, but his heart was light. He made his way through the familiar trail, now overgrown. The clearing was still there, and so was the tree. Its bark was cracked deeper, its branches hung heavier. But when Eli sat one last time, it recognized him. No words were spoken, no wind blew, but the oak remembered. And when Eli closed his eyes, leaning once more against its great trunk, the whispers welcomed him home. And so the story goes. If you ever find yourself walking in the woods under a heavy moon, and the trees begin to hush around you, you might find a clearing. You might see an old oak, and if you sit, truly sit, perhaps, just perhaps, it will remember you too. Now close your eyes. Let the echo of the story linger in your breath and drift slowly into sleep. Long ago, in a valley tucked between two sleepy ridgelines, there flowed a river that never rushed. It moved like syrup in the morning sun, slow, thick, and thoughtful. No one knew where it began. Some said it came from beneath the mountains. Others whispered that it had no beginning at all, that it was born the moment someone needed it. The townsfolk called it Solway, but the elders, those who remembered the old words, called it the Singing River. Every evening, just as the sun dipped low and turned the water to copper, the river began to hum. Not loud, never loud. It was a soft music, like wind moving through reeds, or the sound a lullaby might make if it forgot its words but remembered its tune. And there was one person who listened more than anyone else. Her name was Miriam. She was small for her age, with dark curly hair and eyes full of old questions. Miriam didn't talk much at school, but she asked questions with her silence. Her parents worked hard. Her mother stitched clothes, and her father tended the railway. So most evenings, Miriam would wander to the riverbank alone, carrying a small notebook and a pencil worn from use. She said the river sang to her, and she tried to write down its songs. Each page of her notebook was filled with crooked lines, gentle curves, strange symbols only she could understand. When asked, she would smile and say, "It's river music. You can't hum it, only feel it." Some kids teased her, others just shrugged. But the elders, the quiet ones with worn hands and slower speech, they nodded. They remembered. They too had heard something once, long ago. One night, a storm came. Not a loud, violent storm, but a long one. Rain drizzled for days, turning paths to mud and silence into dripping constancy. The river swelled, rising higher than it had in years. When the skies cleared, Solway looked different, less like syrup, more like spilled ink, murky, tired, and it was quiet. Miriam ran to the bank, notebook clutched tight. She sat where she always did, knees tucked to her chest, eyes closed. But the song didn't come. She came back the next night. Still no music. For 7 nights she waited, until finally, on the 8th night, she stood and whispered, not to the sky, not to herself, but to the river. Did you forget your song? The water rippled. She took a step closer, then another, and as the sun dipped below the hills, she sat at the edge, dipped her fingers into the cool water, and began to hum. Not the river's song exactly, her own version. And then something happened. The current stirred, not much, just a shiver, and a single note rose from the bend downstream. It wasn't a tune, not yet, but it was a response. The river hadn't forgotten. It had simply been waiting. From that day forward, Miriam didn't just listen. She sang. She sang when the birds flew low over the water. She sang when the fireflies blinked in unison. She sang to the frogs, to the stones, to the moonlight on the ripples. And the river sang back, not always the same way. Some nights it would pulse gently, like a heartbeat. Other nights it hummed slow and low, like a cello underwater. And sometimes, just sometimes, it whispered things no song had words for. Miriam's notebook filled, not just with marks, but with meanings. She wrote down feelings, half-thoughts and dreams. She wrote of people who came to the river just to sit beside her, unsure why. They all felt something, like the music knew them. Years passed. Miriam became the woman people visited when they couldn't sleep. Not for medicine, not for advice, just for listening. They'd sit with her beside Solway, and she'd ask nothing, only wait. And then, at dusk, she'd hum a tune, and the river would answer. That's all. And somehow, it helped. A man once said he heard his late mother's voice in the current. A child once claimed the water told her it was okay to be afraid sometimes. A traveller said it sounded like his home country, though he hadn't heard its language in decades. Miriam never explained. She didn't need to. She only smiled and kept listening. When Miriam grew old, she left the town only once, to visit the ocean. They say she sat by the waves for hours, and when she returned, she told no one what she'd heard, only that the ocean was loud, too loud to listen. And so, she returned to Solway, to her bench by the river bend, to her songs. And on the night of her final breath, the river didn't sing. Instead, it was still, not sad, not silent, still, as if pausing respectfully in the presence of an old friend. They never remembered his name. Even the people who grew up alongside him, sat beside him in class, passed him in the grocery aisle, couldn't quite recall what he was called. Some said Eli. Others thought it was Luke. Maybe Sam. It didn't seem to matter. He didn't mind. He liked quiet things. The rustle of dry leaves in autumn, the soft scrape of pencil on paper, the sound a curtain makes when it moves in an open window. And most of all, he liked shadows. Not in the way most children feared them. He didn't think of monsters hiding under beds or ghosts in the closet. To him, shadows were just misunderstood. At first, he noticed them as shapes that stayed a little longer than they should have. The silhouette of a chair that remained on the wall long after the chair had been moved. the shape of a tree branch waving when the tree itself stood still. Sometimes he'd wave at them, and sometimes they waved back. He didn't tell anyone, not because he was afraid, but because it felt private, like a secret between him and the spaces people forgot to look. As he got older, he began talking to them, not out loud, just in his mind. And one day, one of them answered. It was a long shadow cast by a broken fence post. It stretched down the sidewalk as the afternoon sun sank behind the trees. He was sitting on the curb, watching ants march between cracks in the pavement, when he heard it. A voice, software clear, not from beside him, not from behind, from the shadow. You see us, it said. He didn't move, just blinked. I think I do, he whispered back. The shadow didn't ripple. It didn't grow or shrink. But the voice came again. That's rare. He wanted to ask what it meant, but something inside told him not to rush. So he sat and waited. The voice didn't speak again that day. From that afternoon forward, the shadows began to notice him. They moved differently around him, more deliberate, more fluid, like dancers adjusting to a new partner. He began to sense their moods. When they were long and lean, they were curious. When they curled tightly at the base of objects, they were tired. When they fluttered, yes, fluttered, they were amused. He didn't always understand them, but he felt them. He stopped playing with other kids, not out of loneliness. He just didn't need noise anymore. He found company in the flicker of leaves, in the changing shape of his own outline on the sidewalk, in the hush that settled when he entered a dim room. His parents worried, took him to see a counsellor. He's imaginative, the counsellor said gently, but grounded. He passed tests, ate meals, slept peacefully, except sometimes he'd wake at exactly 3:03 a.m., walk to the window, and whisper things into the night. No one knew what, and he never said. On his 13th birthday, he asked for only one gift, a flashlight. Not a toy one, a real one, strong, with a wide beam. He used it not to chase shadows away, but to play with them. He'd point it at different angles, tilt objects this way and that, watching how the darkness bent, stretched, folded. He treated it like art, a moving canvas, a way of speaking without words, and slowly, the shadows grew more expressive. They began to form shapes, not random ones, but familiar outlines. A rabbit, a key, a doorway, a bird in flight. He didn't tell anyone, but each night his flashlight flicked across the walls like a silent conversation, and the shadows responded. One day he disappeared, not in a tragic way, just quietly. The neighbours remembered seeing him walking toward the edge of the woods, flashlight in hand, humming softly. He was barefoot. The sun was setting. They never saw him again. The police searched. Flyers were printed, but nothing turned up. Just a note left on his desk. It read, "Some things don't live in the light, but that doesn't mean they're lost. S." They weren't sure what it meant, but years later, some of the children in the town began reporting strange dreams. Dreams of walking through long corridors of shadow, hand in hand with a quiet boy who never spoke, but always listened. They said he would guide them gently through the dark, past shapes that flickered and danced, and in the distance, they could hear a soft voice whispering, "You see us." Some people dismissed it as imagination. Others weren't so sure. And a few, just a few, began to notice strange things in their homes. A lamp left on casting a shadow that looked like a smile. A shape on the wall that seemed to move when no one else was looking. And sometimes, just sometimes, in the hush of early morning, someone might find a flashlight resting on their doorstep. No note, just the light. In a town where streetlights hummed and porches creaked and windows held the smell of warm bread, there lived a girl named Nora. She was the kind of child who asked the kinds of questions adults didn't know how to answer. Where does the wind go when it gets tired? Why can't we see the stars when we're crying? Do you think the moon gets lonely? People would smile politely, pat her on the head, and offer her a cookie. But Nora never wanted cookies. She wanted the sky. Every night, she'd climb onto the roof of her house. It wasn't particularly tall, but it was just high enough to feel like a world apart. She'd bring a blanket and notebook and a small thermos of tea her grandmother had made. And she'd talk to the moon. She never expected it to answer, but she talked anyway. About her day, about her dreams, about how sometimes she wished the world were just a little softer. And the moon listened. It always seemed a little brighter when she spoke, a little closer. One night, when the world felt especially heavy, the kind of night where even pillows can't soften the weight of thoughts, Nora whispered something new. "Could I borrow you?" she asked. There was no wind, no owl, no sound, just the soft shimmer of moonlight washing across her face. "I don't mean forever," she said quickly. "Just for a little while. I want to show people what wonder looks like up close." The moon didn't answer, but that night, as she drifted to sleep on the roof, she dreamed of light. And when she awoke, it was gone. The moon, gone from the sky. At first, people were confused, then worried, then wild with panic. Scientists scrambled, telescopes spun, TV screens flashed. The moon had vanished, and no one could explain why. But Nora knew. She looked beside her, and there it was, not full-sized, not massive and glowing, but small, round, software, hovering just above her hand like a balloon without string. She reached out, and it followed. It glowed, not with blinding brightness, but with a calm, silver warmth, like a heartbeat made of light. She placed it in a glass jar, and the world noticed. Wherever she went, the jar glowed gently, casting soft halos around strangers, lighting dark corners of anxious rooms. People followed her, not in a stampede, but in a hush. They didn't ask why the moon had come to her. They didn't demand to hold it. They just sat nearby. And in that light, things softened. Old regrets faded a little. Arguments slowed. Children stopped crying. Even clocks seemed to tick a bit slower. But as days passed, Nora felt the jar grow heavier. Not in her hands. In her heart. The moon was kind. But it was homesick. It didn't say so. Not in words. But she could feel it. Each night it glowed a little dimmer. Not in sadness, but in longing. And so, one evening, as dusk settled in like a blanket and the sky sighed with stars, Nora walked to the tallest hill just outside of town. She unscrewed the lid and said, "Thank you." The moon didn't rise immediately. It hovered, touched her cheek one last time, then drifted upward, slowly, patiently, like a kite riding an invisible breeze, until it returned to its place in the sky. Whole, bright, home. The world exhaled. The scientists never explained it. The news moved on. The panic faded. But Nora never forgot. And every night, from then on, the moon would rise just a little earlier over her roof. It would hang there, right above her, before continuing its climb across the sky, as if checking in. And she would smile, wave and say, "Thanks for letting me borrow you." They called him Walt, not Walter, not Mr. Adams, just Walt. He lived in a small house at the edge of a town that had no rush, a town where buses were almost always a minute late and no one really minded, where screen doors creaked on purpose and people still wrote letters by hand. Walt was older than most, but not ancient. His beard was soft and white, and his eyes held the kind of patience only time could teach. No one really knew what he did. He wasn't a teacher, but he always had an answer. He wasn't a doctor, but people felt better after sitting with him. He wasn't a priest, but he listened like one. And every morning, at exactly 6:03 a.m., Walt would begin walking. He didn't walk fast, nor far, just around town. Same streets, same path, but always a little differently. Sometimes he'd pause to watch a bird hop across a fence. Sometimes he'd stop in front of the bakery and close his eyes just to smell the bread. Sometimes he'd stand near the park fountain, not sitting, not moving, just standing, breathing. People joked he was wasting time. Walt never argued. He'd just smile and say, "Time's not something you waste. It's something you notice." Children followed him sometimes, quietly. They called it walking with time. Parents didn't mind. Walt always brought them back calm, lighter somehow. He'd point things out along the way. A cracked sidewalk that looked like a lightning bolt. A mailbox painted with stars someone had forgotten they painted. A dandelion growing through asphalt. "Time leaves clues," he'd say. "You just have to slow down enough to see them." One summer, Walt didn't walk for 3 days. The town noticed. Not with panic, just quiet worry. On the fourth morning, he returned to his route, cane in hand. A bit slower, but smiling. When asked, he said only, "I needed a moment to catch up." And people believed him. Because with Walt, that meant something. As years passed, Walt grew older. His steps grew shorter. His walks more deliberate. But the children, now teenagers, now adults, still walked with him sometimes. And one evening, at sunset, a reporter asked him, "What's your secret? How do you seem so at peace all the time?" Walt looked at the horizon. The sky was pink and gold, melting into indigo. He answered softly, "Most people chase time. Others hide from it. I just walk beside it." The reporter didn't print the quote, said it was too abstract. But the townsfolk never forgot. On Walt's last walk, the town knew. He didn't say anything, but people joined him, quietly. A line of neighbours, strangers, dogs, kids, visitors, all walking slowly, behind an old man with a cane and a steady pace. They walked through the park, past the bakery, past the library, and at the last corner, Walt stopped. He turned, smiled, and whispered, "Thanks for walking with me." Then he sat on the bench beneath the big maple tree, closed his eyes, and rested. There's no statue of Walt in town, no plaque, no official day named after him. But every morning, at 6:03, people still walk. No destination, no phones, no rush, just steps, breaths, stillness. Some say they do it for health. Others say it helps them think. But a few know the truth. They're walking with time. And time is walking with them. So wherever you are now, whatever you've been holding, let it loosen. Let time slow down. Not because you stopped it, but because you're not racing it. Let the night wrap around you like an old coat. Let your breathing match the fire's last flickers. And sleep software unhurried, at peace.